Good morning. Welcome to church. It's good to see most of you. And not like most of you is in like I wish some of you weren't here, but most of you is in like I only see part of your faces. It's good to see you. Welcome to church. Something that I love that I get to see, and I was talking to our worship team about this morning. We pray before service starts, and I love that I get to see when people come together and volunteer because they're passionate about serving the church. Not only serving the church, but serving with the church. And something that we just love to do too is we just kind of talk this idea of like how we want to show our appreciation. We also want to make people famous on it too, just because of the work that they put into it. So how many of you guys, whenever you drive up, ever notice just how amazing like our lawn is kept here at the church? Anybody? Yeah, it's incredible. And I might miss some names and I hope I don't, but the mowing team that we are so thankful for. The guys, they show up here almost every Saturday to mow, but it's Jerry Helfenbein, Jerry Beaver, Preston Beaver, Keith McCullough, and Maurice Luckett's been helping. But yeah, let's give them our appreciation because they do such a good job, and we're so thankful for the work that they put in. It's been a good week. It's been a weird week, but I think most weeks are kind of weird right now, right? I mean, there's so much stuff going on. Every day there's new information. Every day there's something else happening. If you get on Facebook, one day to the next, the story changes. And it gets kind of crazy, right? Where you're walking through and you're like, man, a lot of us is just shooting at moving targets, trying to figure out what our right reaction, what our right response is going to be. And a lot of times that ends up, well, it kind of distracts us sometimes, you know? How many of you guys have ever said like, yes, I can be easily distracted? Okay, some of you are like really in this and really honest right there. Others of you weren't paying attention when I said that. No, I'm kidding. But no, I mean, as a people, we get distracted, and sometimes I'm the worst. I could be going through anything, and if I see this, I'm going to get a little distracted, right? It's cute, right? But then, I want to see more pictures of cute puppies, and so I go to the next. Oh, and there's another cute dog. Well, now we have to keep going, right? So here we go. Oh, don't you just want to snuggle his little face? But then, and we just keep going down and then thinking, oh, that's a cute one. But then my idea on that looks a little bit like Elvis. And so then I start to look up dogs that look like Elvis. And so then I find this guy right here. And I really hope that that's a toupee that he's wearing. Otherwise, oh, poor puppy. But then I started to think, keep going down the list. And then we get to a dog that really looks like Elvis. Who doesn't love a Collian aviators, right? And so then I start to think about Elvis the guy. And so I start to look up Elvis. And I start to see all the stuff that Elvis is doing. And then I start to think, man, didn't Elvis, he drove a very specific car, but I couldn't think of what it was. And so then I look that up and I find out, oh yeah, it's a 1955 pink Cadillac. And so I'm looking at the Cadillac and I'm thinking, that's a really cool car right there. And then I start thinking about pink Cadillacs and I'm thinking, man, there's someone else that really drives pink Cadillacs a lot. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. Mary Kay dealers drive pink Cadillacs. That's like the ultimate goal is Mary Kay. And so then I start thinking, man, I wonder who started Mary Kay. Is it actually a person named Mary Kay? Spoiler alert, it is. And that's her face right there. But you know what the point is in all of this? I get distracted easily. Because I was just going about my day and all of a sudden I'm looking at Mary Kay's face. And how many of you guys have ever done that? The amount of times in my household where we've said, I don't get it. I was just going to check this one thing on Facebook, and then all of a sudden it's a half hour later, and I'm reading an article entitled Child Stars and What They Look Like Today. Just me? All right. Oh, man. But yeah, no, it's crazy how distracted we can sometimes get and how easily we can be distracted. It comes easily. And the thing is, though, it's not just true of us now. Facebook has not made us more distracted people. I mean, it might have a little bit, but really, it's been part of the human condition for our existence. We are a distracted people. It was true for people today. It was true for the people that Paul is writing to in Romans as well. And as human beings, we just have the tendency to become distracted. And so today we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about keeping the perspective of the eternal. We're going to talk about keeping our eyes on the prize. But you can't talk about that without talking about the things that our eyes are on, the things that our eyes are tending towards, the distractions that we're leaning into. And so today we're going to unpack some hard stuff too. So as we dive into that, let's take a second. Let's stop. Let's ask God to really give us the humility to hear his call, the humility to be convicted, and the courage to apply it to our lives and to make changes and to repent as a church, as a people. So let's stop and let's go to God before we even attempt to understand what he's saying here in Romans chapter 8. Let's pray. God, we love you. God, thank you that we get to call you Father. Father, I ask that you would help us. God, that you would speak to us, that you would give us your heart. Holy Spirit, I ask that you would speak through me today, that you would take these words and implant them into the hearts of your people. I ask that you would pray for us, that you would speak for us, that you would testify to us the truth of who we are. God, we love you. Thank you for loving us. We ask these things in the name of Jesus. Amen. All right. So Brett left us off last week with an understanding that we are invited to become children of God. That this is an invitation of the called, that we can become children of God. And in fact, he left it in Romans chapter 8:15. It says this, "So you have not received a spirit that makes you fearful slaves, but instead you received God's Spirit when he adopted you as his own children. Now we call him Abba, Father, for his Spirit joins with our spirit to affirm that we are God's children." Paul is very intentional with the language that he uses in these verses. He fills them in, and the further along you go, we saw that in Romans chapter 7, right? Whenever Paul was talking about the things I want to do, I don't do, but the things I don't want to do, I do, and he just goes back and forth. Really intentional language to describe a struggle. But here's the thing, Paul is now using very intentional language to show us where we fit in God's kingdom, to where we fit as children of God, because I know that whenever I read these things, I have to ask myself the question of, am I a child of God? Does that apply to me? And I'm going through all these things trying to understand it, and Paul is so intentional here that we're just going to dive through this. So we're all God's creation, but here we're given the privilege to become children of God. There's a difference. And here Paul begins to lay out the privileges we have as adopted children of the Father. He kind of lays out 4 different privileges, and if you're taking notes with us on the app or on paper, we're going to kind of go through these, but these are all on the app as well. But Paul begins to lay out the privileges we have as adopted children of the Father, and the first privilege that we have is security. We can be secure in our place, not as fearful slaves, but as beloved children. And we see that in the verse that Paul just talked about. He says, you have not received a spirit that makes you fearful slaves. You've received a spirit that allows you to be secure in where you are in Jesus. And then he says this, that we also have authority. If we're no longer slaves, but instead we are now children of God, then we no longer have to submit ourselves to the authority of sin. Remember we talked about that a couple weeks ago. That we no longer have the obligation to sin. We no longer have to be under the slavery to sin. We have the authority over sin in our lives. In the face of sin, we have the authority. We're not fearful. We speak, we stand, we're strong. Not because we're strong, but because God is strong in us. And then Paul says we have, just in this verse, is he says, I love it because the verse it says is, now we call him Abba, Father. Right? And so what we have next is we have intimacy. That's a privilege of being a child of God, to being adopted into the family of God, is that we now have security, we have authority, and we have intimacy. And I love it because it's not the first time that the word Abba has been used in reference to God. The first time was when Jesus taught his disciples how to pray. He said, when you pray, you should say this, our Father. But the word that he used was actually, when you pray, say this, Abba. And again, Paul says it here. We call him Abba, Father. Now that is an incredibly familiar, almost offensively familiar word to talk about God. Because what it says is this, it's like my kid saying daddy to me. That's the intimacy that's in the word Abba. And it's not just that we call him Abba Father. The actual word there is the Greek word kratzo. Everyone say it. It's fun. Kratzo. I like it. I heard a lot of phlegm in the audience, and that's good. That's what you need. You need it more for Hebrew than for Greek, but you're right there. Kratzo is the word. And he says, we call out to him, Abba, Father. The word call out is the word kratzo, which means that it's not just to call out. It's not just to speak it. It's to cry it out. Like a kid that just busted up his knee crying for his dad. That's the level that Paul is calling us to cry out to our God as our Abba, Father. It means to cry out. Paul's very deliberate here. This is a loud cry that expresses a deep emotion that is felt from the core of who we are. Just as a child, when they get hurt, goes to the immediate understanding of who they want. And I got to be honest, there's times where I really love that when my kids get hurt, their first words are daddy, right? Because I want to wrap them up and I want to hold them. And then every now and then, they'll say mommy. And sometimes I'm like, oh, good, I can stay on the couch. No, not really. But seriously, there are times where, we get to hear our children reach out to us because in the moments of their pain, they reach out to their father. They reach out to their parent. They reach out to their mother. It's a very deliberate thing. And it's also an acknowledgement that God is not distant, but that he is a present father. And that we believe that beyond just intellectual or theological or doctrinal understanding, but that we have experienced his presence and we cry out to him, Abba, Father. And the last thing is this. Well, it's not the last thing. There's a lot of privileges that come with being a child of the Father, right? But the last thing that Paul hits in this section is that we have assurance. It's not just that we have security in our place with God. It's not just that we have authority over sin in our life. It's not just, that we have intimacy with God as our Father, but that we also have assurance that when we cry out, Abba, Father, that the Spirit of God will come right alongside us and assure us that, yes, you can call him Father. Yes, you are in his family. Yes, you have the privileges as a son. You have an assurance that you are a part of the family of God. The word there in the passage is that the Spirit comes beside us and affirms who we are. And that word affirm there, it's actually a legal word meaning to testify. So what it's saying is that the Spirit testifies that we are God's children. Hear this. This is really cool. This is beyond how we feel about it. To give you an example, my name is Paul Vanderveer. Actually, my name is Paul Garrett Vanderveer. My first name, Paul, is taken from my grandfather on my mother's side. My middle name, Garrett, is taken from the middle name of my grandfather on my father's side. And the Vanderveer name has been going for generations. And if I called my dad and said, Dad, I don't really feel like a son today. He's like, well, yeah, but you are. It doesn't matter how you feel. It's a legal state of who I am. I am Paul Garrett Vanderveer. I can't just not be that. Now, I know I can get my name changed, but that's beside the point. You guys get what I'm saying right here? That whenever we come before God, it doesn't matter how we feel about our sonship, about our daughtership, about being a part of the family, because we are a part of the family, and the Spirit testifies that we are God's children. He uses legal language here to show that it's beyond how we feel about it. The Spirit comes beside us to show us the paperwork that proves that we are the children of God. It's the same thing if I come up to my son Micaiah and I pull out his birth certificate and I say, look right there, man, under mother, under father, it says Paul Vanderveer, it says Mallory Vanderveer, which means you are our child. We are your parents. Even if you don't feel like you deserve us as parents, because we're so awesome. Even if you feel like you are just the worst kid in the entire world, we are your parents. Legally, it's right there on paper, regardless of how you feel about it. So we are secure. We have authority. We have intimacy. And we are assured of our place as God's children. And it's really interesting because Paul really confirms this with his people before he moves on. And it's one of those things, like if somebody ever comes up to you and they start giving you a lot of compliments, usually it's that point where like something's coming. If someone comes up and says, I love the way you do this, I love the way you do this, I love the way you do this, like there's a but coming. I know it. It's coming, right? But Paul continues to build up in Romans 8:17. He says, and since we are his children, we are his heirs. In fact, together with Christ, we are heirs of God's glory. But if we are to share in his glory, we must also share in his suffering. Didn't that paragraph start so nice? And since we are his children, we're his heirs. I love being an heir. That means I get stuff. We are his heirs. In fact, together with Christ, we are heirs of God's glory. And we've already been told over and over in Scripture that God's glory is immeasurable. And so Paul says, you are heirs of Christ. You are heirs of his glory. And we're like, I love it. And then he says, but if we are to share his glory, we must all share his suffering. Wait, what? That's almost like one of those, like, you know, at the end of a new medicine commercial where it has like that really fast, deep voice that tells you how horrible your life could get if you take this thing. It's that thing of like, we are heirs of his glory. But if we are to share in his glory, we must share in his suffering. You know, it's like that kind of thing. It's not really. Paul is very clear here. In fact, he goes on in this next section to really unpack this idea. But that's the thing. Paul tells them very clearly, you are the beloved children of God. You have privilege as his adopted children. And we get really excited about that. And he says, but if we're going to share in his glory, we also must share in his suffering. We are the heirs of Christ's glory. And we're going to talk about that more in a second. But we're also heirs of Christ's suffering. See, pain's actually a condition of human life. Meaning that to be human is to experience hardships and pain. But what Paul is talking here goes beyond the normal. See, we're connected through our adoption to the family of Christ. And here's the thing, Jesus faced rejection and persecution because of who he was. Jesus faced so much hardship because of the message that he came to bring to this world. And what Paul says here is that we too must join with him in that suffering. In fact, Jesus even says it in John chapter 15, verses 18 through 20. He says, if the world hates you, remember that it hated me first. The world would love you as one of its own if you belong to it, but you're no longer part of the world. I chose you to come out of the world, so it hates you. It's a promise of Jesus, and we can see that as something to dread. We can look at that promise and say, oh my goodness, it's coming. Oh no. We can see it as something to dread. Or what happens if we see it as an undeserved privilege? To even suffer under the name of Jesus, to treat that as a privilege instead of as something to dread. I'll be honest with me, that stretches. That's hard. But then I get to read in Acts chapter 5, starting in verse 40. Oh, sorry. This is the rest of Jesus' thing, my bad. Do you remember what I told you? As the slave is not greater than the master. Since they persecuted me, naturally they will persecute you. Jesus gives the promise of persecution. And then we get to look at it as either something to dread or a privilege that we hope to achieve one day. And then we see this in Acts chapter 5, verse 40, where it says, they called in the apostles and had them flogged. Then they ordered them never again to speak in the name of Jesus. And hear this, please. And they let them go. The apostles left the high council rejoicing that God had counted them worthy to suffer disgrace for the name of Jesus. We get to be like him in his suffering. It's a gift. It's a privilege. God is working in us to conform us into the image of Christ. And we cannot look like Christ until we join him also in his suffering. It's a privilege that we get to step in the feet of Jesus. But Paul doesn't just stop there either. Paul goes forward. And he says that we will join Christ in suffering, but then he immediately goes on to talk about the perspective of that suffering. Paul says, you will join Christ in suffering. He says, if you're going to be his heirs in glory, you're going to need to be his heirs in suffering as well. And then he picks it up in chapter 8, verses 18 through 23. And he says this, yet what we suffer now is nothing compared to the glory he will reveal to us later. Stop for just a second. He says, okay, you're going to have to join Christ in suffering, but what we're suffering now is nothing compared to the glory that we will experience later. It's not even worth mentioning them in the same sentence. I'm really impressed with my oldest daughter, Hattie, and Eden, how they have come so far, and even Micaiah, as they've come so far as swimmers over the past couple of years. But I'm not going to compare them to Michael Phelps. Because at that point, I'm like, it's like, yeah, great. They dove off the diving board and swam to the side. Good job. But have you won 8 gold medals in one event? No, I'm not going to do that. Because it's not even worth comparing the two because it's so vastly different. Paul gives this imagery here. He says your suffering is so small compared to the glory that he's going to reveal to us later. He continues. For all creation is waiting eagerly for that future day when God will reveal who his children really are. Against its will, all creation was subjected to God's curse. But with eager hope, the creation looks forward to the day when it will join God's children in glorious freedom from death and decay. For we know that all creation has been groaning as in the pains of childbirth right to the present time. And we believers also groan, even though we have the Holy Spirit within us as a foretaste of future glory. For we long for our bodies to be released from sin and suffering. We too wait with eager hope for the day when God will give us our full rights as his adopted children, including the new bodies he has promised us. That's worth it. You can give an amen on that. That's good. Paul says that we're going to suffer in this world. But that suffering isn't even worthy of comparing to the glory that comes later. It can't compare. And as I look around the world, especially right now, I see death. I see diseases. I see fires that threaten entire continents. I see earthquakes and tsunamis and floods. I see some of the most negative thought that I've seen. I see the name of Jesus being trampled through the mud. I see Christians who profess his name and yet show hatred to people around them. I see suffering. And I honestly get a little offended at how Paul words this. Because when Paul says that our current suffering can't even be compared to the future glory, I'm tempted to think that he's trying to minimize the suffering that we're going through. But here's the thing, and please hear me out on this, because one, I don't know if I've even tasted real suffering the way that some of my Christian brothers and sisters are experiencing it across the world. But hear this. Paul is not minimizing your suffering. He's maximizing the glory of God. He's not minimizing what you're going through. And there are people in this room that are going through some pretty hard things. He's not minimizing that. He's maximizing the glory of God. And as we see all these things that cause incredible suffering in our world, honestly, we kind of get filled with this idea, right? That this thought that, man, this just isn't right. I can't be alone there, looking around and just having that thought of, this just isn't right. And it's not just us. Paul says that all creation is groaning for things to be made right. He says that creation is groaning with the pains like childbirth, just waiting for things to be made right. Creation is groaning. And the incredible promise of this passage is that is exactly what's going to happen. That the world is groaning for things to be made right. That the children of God are groaning for things to be made right. And then Paul says, yeah, and that's exactly what God's going to do. He's going to make it right. One day all creation, including us, will be released from death and decay. And things will be made right. Meaning that things will be made the way that they were originally intended to be made. Paul here is talking to a church that is experiencing and will experience tremendous persecution and suffering. And he acknowledges that, but then he immediately puts the suffering into the perspective of the glory of the victory that is to come. And when I realized that God is going to make everything right, that pain and death and decay will one day be turned into a memory, man, if that just doesn't reprioritize my entire life. If it doesn't reprioritize my suffering, if it doesn't reprioritize our frustrations, our complaints, the things that we enjoy, the things that we despise, it reprioritizes everything and gives us the perspective of the eternal.
That we can look through things and we can see it, not just how it affects us at the moment, but we can see it from the perspective, the long view of the eternal that is to come. Because I'll be honest, I'm really looking forward to the day when God makes it right. Can I tell you really quickly, though? I had a dream. This is not a prophetic dream. This is just a dream I had where Jesus came back. But I want to share it with you a little bit. Because sometimes I've had dreams where, trumpets go off, the earth shakes, and then I'm filled with this feeling of fear. And this feeling of realizing every area that I don't measure up, and how many times I could have done something better, and how many people I didn't reach out to. And I'm sitting there thinking, oh, Lord, how am I going to survive the coming judgment? But this dream was 2 weeks ago. I had this dream where I was talking to somebody, one of the members of our church, who came to me and said, hey, Paul, Jesus is coming soon. And so I sat down and I said, okay, well, listen, here, the book of Revelation, it's one of those books that's meant for kind of all times. It's really relevant to all times within the church. And yes, Jesus is coming soon. We're living in the end times, but we've been in them for 2,000 years, and it's not really up to us to know when he's coming. It's up to us to live in such a way that we're ready when he does. And I was given these really great theological arguments towards it, and then right in the middle of that, the whole world went dark. Lights went out, sun went out, moon went out, stars went out, dark. Terrifyingly dark. And then it's the sound of like a foghorn just went off. It wasn't like that, like what I've had in other dreams. It was like, and we just had this moment where like all of a sudden I had this certainty that this was it. And then the lights come back on, but it's not the lights that we had before. Instead, it's these two gigantic rainbows that are on the horizon and the sun that's in the middle of them. And as I'm standing there looking at this with the complete understanding that this is real, this is happening, I'm stepping into this. The crazy part was this. I looked around, and those that were not believers were trying to bury their faces in the ground. But the believers that were standing around began running towards the light. And as I was running towards the light in this dream, it's a dream, guys, it's a dream. But as I was running towards the light in this dream, I had two thoughts. One, I couldn't believe that I got to do what I was doing at that moment. It's like, the idea of like when you're running towards like a roller coaster and you're like, I can't believe I'm about to get on this thing. But the second thing was this. I still remembered all my sin. I still remembered my failures. I still remembered every opportunity that I didn't even remember before that point, but every opportunity that I had let the gospel slide through my fingers because I was too embarrassed to say something. But the difference in this dream was that I was running towards Jesus because I knew that he was the one that had the cure. That he was about to take every bad thing in me and make it right. That he was about to cure us of everything. And the crazy part is, I got up, went to my office that day, opened up the scriptures to start prepping for this sermon, and I got to Romans chapter 8 where it starts talking about things being made right. And the perspective that gives us that, man, Jesus is going to come back. There will come a point where the only thing that matters is God. Sin will be a distant memory. Pain will not exist. We will have new bodies in a new world. But the calling of Paul here in this section is this, because he talks about suffering and he talks about the future glory, and he does that to make this point. Do your absolute best not to get distracted by the temporary things of this world. That's hard, because the temporary things of this world are super distracting. There's an old hymn that actually says this really well. Some of you will know it. It says, "Turn your eyes upon Jesus. Look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace." I'm pretty sure whoever wrote that was like, yeah, I just read Romans chapter 8. So hear me out on this, okay? Pain is temporary. Your job is temporary. According to Scripture, your biological family is temporary. Everything you own is temporary. And this one better get a praise Jesus. COVID-19 and mask mandates are temporary. There it is. But here's the thing. In fact, McAllister, Oklahoma, the United States of America, and every other nation in this world is temporary. There are no geopolitical borders in the kingdom of heaven. And the truth is all those things that I just said, when Jesus comes back, those things cease to matter. But those things tend to take up 99.999% of our focus. Now, please hear me on this, because I understand. This doesn't mean that there are not important things that require our attention. It doesn't mean that there aren't things that are not eternal that we do have to give our attention to. That's okay. But we have to prioritize with the long view in mind. We have to look at our world, at our life, at our decisions and say, okay, am I making decisions because I want to set myself up for life, or am I making decisions because I want to set up the eternal? What's my guiding force here? What is my priority? Our first priority has to be our allegiance to the kingdom of heaven, and everything else takes a back seat. Because we're called to speak to things. We're called to things that speak into the eternal. And we cannot do them if our eyes extend only as far as our lives in this world. We can't live like we hit 90 and we're done. And the truth is, and that Paul lines this out here, that the life of the called is not one for the faint of heart. It requires that we push past our most basic reflexes. It calls us to love when we're hated. It calls us to return snide comments with blessings. To give up our freedoms to love those around us. And to cherish the kingdom of heaven above all things. To say no to things that set us up for life so that we can say yes to things that set us up for eternity. We have to keep the perspective. We have to see the long view of existence. I've said this before, but it's one of my favorite things that C.S. Lewis said. He said that in the life that we live, if the life that we live here on earth were to be told in the form of a book, our whole existence told in the form of a book, our time on the earth would simply be the cover page. That we have such a short time here, and that we are made for something far more grand than this. So if I can just for a second, because there are times where I love to get up in front of you and just unpack Scripture and talk to you after service and throughout the week and kind of go through these things together. But then there are other times, too, where the weight of the calling of pastor sits heavy. And we start to see attitudes in our people. So let me say this, as a younger brother to some of you in faith, as the same age brother as some of you, and as an older brother to some of you. Don't get caught up with what you see in front of you to the point that you forget the eternal. Right now, it's so easy for us to not be happy with decisions that are being made on a state, local, and national level. Don't get so caught up in that you forget the real importance of the eternal. It's so easy for us to see enemies rather than beloved children of God. Don't get caught up in the temporary over the eternal. It's so easy for us to want to be wronged and to reach out for justification and not let the Lord be our justification. Don't get caught up in the temporary to the point that you forget the eternal. Because the truth be told is this, a lot of the things that we're really passionately against right now, in light of the eternal, they don't matter. So as a church, let's be a people who grab on and hold with ferocity the intent of the eternal. Let's keep our eyes on the prize. Let's keep the priority in front of us so that we can step out and people can see the Christian as someone who steps out and loves without regard for themselves. Someone who desperately wants to come to people who hate them to try to get them to understand that there is salvation waiting for them. We need to hold on to the priority. And so, as we kind of finish, I just want to close out with this one question. It's kind of rhetorical, but I just want you to think about it. Do your decisions and priorities show that you're keeping the perspective of the eternal? It's really an invitation for you to do a little bit of an inventory of yourself. Where are your priorities in your life? How do you respond to things that are happening around you? And I'll be honest with you too, like I completely understand. For those that are watching at home, for those that are sitting in our church right now, I completely understand. And I hate Mass just as much as you guys do. But are we approaching even small things like this and asking ourselves, what is the call that Jesus is having me make here? What's the call that actually speaks into the eternal things here? Our decisions and our priorities show that we're keeping the perspective of the eternal. It's not an invitation to beat yourself up. It's not an invitation for you to look at it and say, oh my goodness, Lord, what am I going to do? It's not time to rack yourself with guilt if you've messed this up down the road. Really what this is time to realize is that Jesus is the cure that we're looking for. And to come to him in repentance and to say, God, I want to have the eternal view. God, I want to have the long view of my life because I realize that I'm getting caught up in things that don't matter when compared to the eternal. This world is not our home. To bring in another hymn, we're just passing through. But here's the thing. It's not our home, but we are called to do a very specific work while we're here. And Satan is really good at distracting the people of God. And we have to be just tenacious to keep from being distracted. Let me pray over you. God, we love you. God, please help us to lean into you and to, God, I ask that you would show us the perspective of the eternal because it's so far beyond sometimes what we can grasp. But Father, thank you so much that we get to call you Father. Thank you that you allow us to be your children. Thank you for the assurance that you give us, God. Thank you for the intimacy that we can have with you. But Father, I ask through the Spirit that you would convict us, that you would look through every piece of our lives, and that you would transform us to look more like Jesus than we look like ourselves, to look more like you than we look like the world. God, please help us to love. I ask these things in the name of Jesus. Amen. I didn't get to barely touch the width and depth that is the last part of Romans chapter 8. I encourage you so much to read through that 17 times this week. 18 if you really want to, but at least 17. Read through that as much as you can this week because it holds some incredible truths of God that are highly encouraging for where we're going through and what the world is right now. I really encourage that. But also, one of the things we like to do is to open this up at the end of the service to community questions. And so we have these 3 questions that we've kind of written for you to be able to engage with each other on. And so there's no need to whisper. You can talk at full volume. You can look around. You can talk to the person behind you, beside you, around you. But ask these questions of each other and hear each other's hearts. This is something that it's just time for us as a community to go through these questions together. So we'll put 2 minutes on the clock and go ahead and ask these questions.